Welcome everybody to the China Plus One Strategy Seminar. My name is Pasi Hankanen. I'm the chairman of Finnish Business Council. I've been hosting this, of course. First, I need to thank Vision Finland, Antti, Juuso from Thailand. They have been instrumental to get this up and running, pushing me to get the logistics as well. So Antti, fantastic job. So briefly, together we're trying to explore the critical shifts businesses are making as they diversify operations beyond China, strengthening supply chains and mitigating risks. This discussion is particularly timely as we witness profound transformation in global trade dynamics. Our esteemed panel of experts will share insights of the origins of the China Plus One strategy and why ASEAN countries play a pivotal role in this success. Together, let's navigate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead in this evolving landscape. So thank you from myself. And I think I'll give Antti the next marks.
Thank you, Pasi. Good afternoon, Ambassador Markkanen, and good day to everyone joining us from across Southeast Asia, China, India, and Finland. I'm Antti Rahikainen. I'm Business Development Director at Vision Finland. I sincerely thank the Embassy of Finland in Singapore, Ambassador Juha Markkanen, and the Finnish Business Council Singapore, Pasi Haatainen, for collaborating with Vision Finland on this webinar. A special thank you to Tuuli Macaulay for her insightful keynote speech and to Mikko Salmilahti for his contribution to the panel discussion. We are also profoundly grateful to the sponsors for their invaluable support. I'm thrilled to see such strong participation. We had 70 people registered. Vision Finland has actively promoted this event. Seeing it come to life with such enthusiasm is truly rewarding. I encourage all of you to engage actively in the discussion. Please don't hesitate to share your questions and comments. Your insights are vital to today's dialogue. On behalf of Vision Finland, welcome. I'm pleased to hand the floor over to Ambassador Markkanen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Antti, and thank you so much, Pasi. So warmest thanks for Vision Finland and Finnish Business Council here in Singapore for inviting me to make a couple of remarks at the beginning. I have 10 points for you, and I underline that I'm a generalist. I've been in foreign service 33 years, and my background was in the banking sector, not central bank truly, but a regional bank in my hometown in Savo region. But I have had the great privilege of doing during my 30 years in foreign service a lot of trade, economic, and kind of finance issues in Germany, in Japan, in Sweden, USA, and now I'm here in Singapore, where I have been a year, and hopefully 3 years to go. And I'm very happy to see also Antti from KL, and Pekka from KL, from Business Finland. That Pekka Laitinen is here because I start with Pekka's points. For a couple of weeks ago, we had visitors from Finland, and Pekka Laitinen made a strong argument on this China Plus One, and he said that China Plus One is reality. And I start with those words of Pekka. And secondly, DBS Bank, Bain Company, and Angsana Council, they published recently, a couple of weeks ago, together a study on Southeast Asia. And in this very study, one key finding is really that in China, low-cost labor and subsidized land, they are no longer main drivers for foreign companies in the FDIs. And this is the beginning where I start. And firstly, my first point, so here in Southeast Asia, there are at the moment even lower cost labor available than in China. That is, I think, particularly, for example, in Vietnam. So rising costs are one key factor behind China Plus One thinking at global companies. Secondly, in this very study I was just mentioning, it was also pointed out that at the moment there is more and more skilled labor available also here in Southeast Asian countries, and not only in China. So, for example, Malaysia and Singapore have got very many ICT and digitalized investments during past few years made by foreign and global ICT companies. And this means that Southeast Asian countries can be very promising markets for Finnish companies too in the field of digitalization, ICT, cyber, AI, etc. My third point is that then of course geopolitical rivalry between USA and China is one key factor that companies have been starting to think of other countries than only China. And why? Of course, because companies want to minimize risks of possible unexpected geopolitical shocks. Nobody knows what will happen at the US elections in a very short time. My fourth point is that earlier in China, I think it was COVID as one key issue and challenge which was showing for global companies and foreign companies the shortages and challenges, for example, in deliveries of subcontractors. And I personally think that COVID was one key reason which made companies start to think of a need for China plus one. Fifthly, in Southeast Asian countries, economic growth is expected to be bigger than in China during the coming 10 years. Current population of Asian countries is approximately 660 million people, but population is expected to grow to 750 million by 2030. So market potential is growing here in Southeast Asian countries and also with young and new customers. But on the contrary, in China, population is projected to start to decrease gradually in the future. And we need to remember all the time that companies, of course, make long-term projections. My sixth point here is that, to my mind, deflation is really a big threat for economic development there in China. Pekka Laitinen knows very well Japan, but I also was working in Japan 20 years ago at the Finnish embassy during 2000 to 2004, 4 years. And that decade was called in Japan lost decade. But unfortunately, these difficult decades have been a reality in Japan also after 2000, 2010, the first decade. It was called lost. My point here is that with 130 million Japanese and 1.4 billion Chinese, there is a threat that deflation can hit China with 10 times bigger hammer. And aging challenges are already there, a reality in China. And what I have recently also read, cuts in salaries of governmental owned companies too. So I didn't know that. Perhaps we can discuss in a panel on this. But these two things together make, to my mind, very likely that private consumption will be decreasing in China, and that is a very important phenomenon when we think of the growth expectations there in China. My seventh point is that Southeast Asia countries, they will also give, at the moment, pretty attractive benefits for companies. For example, tax and other benefits. So, and here Singapore has a very big, is a very big actor in this field, and the actor is Economic Development Board. At EDB, 500 persons are working there, and they can give a lot of support for foreign companies if those companies are interested in investing to Singapore. And I'm quite sure that other Southeast Asian countries also are giving support for foreign companies if they want to make any investments. My eighth point is particularly concerning Singapore, and then that's the language issue. So here in Singapore, English is a greatly benefiting foreign companies, and at the same time, a very competitive level of taxation, which is maximum 17%. And even the VIT, GST in Singapore, it's only 9%. So it's very easy for foreign companies to start working in Singapore with English, which is the language of business globally, like we all know. My ninth point is that here in Singapore, government with all ministries and all governmental institutions are working very well and very efficient way. And here in Singapore, it's very crucial for foreign companies that the rule of law mentality is very, very strong here in Singapore. So these are reasons why we here in Singapore have double as much Finnish companies present than for example, there in Japan. And there are also as much than 1,650 family offices located in Singapore, and these reasons are behind that Singapore has developed to become Asia's Switzerland. My last point, 10th point, is that all Southeast Asian countries target now to make better in green transition, I think, too. So this means that there are very big opportunities also for Finnish companies in this very field. And that's not a coincidence that Neste made 1.6 billion euros investments to Singapore to produce sustainable aviation fuel here in Singapore. And for example, Wärtsilä is usually based here in Singapore, but they are looking for all these Southeast Asian markets very broadly, and they see a lot of opportunities there in this greenfield investments and green future. So these were my 10 points. Thank you so much for inviting me, and let's have a great discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juha. Without further ado, I will use, of course, Tuuli Mäkkäli, the economist, senior economist at the Bank of Finland. So I will start sharing now, Tuuli. You can share your screen.
So thank you for inviting me to join the webinar. It's been 2 years since I left Singapore, so seeing all you here feels like I'm back in the region, so it feels very nice. I do miss being in that part of the world, so hopefully one day I'll be there once again. Okay, so let's get going here, and to set the stage, I think it's good to define what the China Plus One strategy is. I'm sure you are all familiar with this concept, but basically it refers to a business strategy where a company does not want to only rely on China, but wants to diversify its operations and supply chains elsewhere too. And this strategy has been out there for many, many years. I think the first driver was China's rising labor costs. And lately, I think heightened by the pandemic, supply chain disruptions became a bigger driver for this strategy. And also in recent years, and I think for the foreseeable future, I guess for many years to come, geopolitical tensions are going to be a significant driver. So why are we talking about this strategy? Well, there certainly seems to be a definite need for it because the whole global landscape is changing, and this truly requires businesses to ensure the resiliency of their operations. China's changing economic environment is a big driver, and we all know that its economic growth is slowing, but also its economic policy uncertainty is elevated. And this is what you see here on the left-hand side. It's a economic policy uncertainty index specifically for China. And you can see that for many years, it was at the low level and quite stable. But since 2017, it started climbing and has remained quite elevated since then. The government has lately increased its involvement in private sector affairs and having or implementing rather unpredictable policies. And this is reportedly causing businesses to reconsider their China strategies. And in fact, last month, the European Chamber of Commerce in China published this position paper in which it has surveyed a bunch of European firms that are operating in China and to see how they feel about the changing environment. And this unpredictable policy environment was highlighted as one of the key concerns for European businesses operating in China. And I do not see a lot of changing in this respect. So it is going to be probably there as long as President Xi Jinping is in power. Then on the right-hand side, you see the global geopolitical risk index, and as you can see, that one is on the rise as well. This is only partially related to China, but truly highlights the global uncertainty and the need for strengthening supply chains. So you can see that it has been rising basically since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and now, of course, there are a lot of other conflicts around the world. Another key driver behind this strategy is the US-China trade conflict. It has been going on for over 6 years already. The US imposed import tariffs and export restrictions on China, and then China retaliated accordingly. I think that regardless of who wins the presidential election in the US next week, the US will continue to be tough on China. Tariffs will remain high, and they may even get higher. And there is clearly a bipartisan consensus in the US that the US has to be tough on China, try to restrict or constrain China's ambitions to become a global economic leader and especially the technology powerhouse globally. And the US considers this as a threat to its national security. So the conflict between these two major economies has triggered quite significant changes to global trade flows, especially when it comes to goods trade between the US and China. So in this chart, you see China's main trade partners as a share of China's total trade. And you can see that the green line, which is the USA, it has been gradually declining since 2018 when the conflict really got underway. So back then, the US was China's main trading partner. It accounted for about over 14% of China's total trade. And now that share has decreased quite substantially to around 11%. Meanwhile, and the reason why we are here today is that the share of the ASEAN region has increased substantially. So it was 12.5% back then, and now it is about 16%. So there's been a significant increase between trade flows of China and ASEAN. It truly seems that the region has been one of the winners of this conflict. And we've done research which shows that the ASEAN trade as well as the FDI inflows have increased more than the global norm during these years. So both Chinese and foreign companies have invested in the region in order to be able to avoid the US tariffs. So now that we've discussed the global context, let's move on to talk about this ASEAN itself, and especially why the ASEAN and why is it so attractive and not some other location. So in this context, I'd like to raise three main features that make ASEAN stand out. First is the fact that the region continues to engage with the rest of the world through deeper economic integration. This is truly applaudable when we are living in a world where many countries are turning inwards. So here on the left-hand side, I put some free trade agreements that the region has. ASEAN has also recently announced that the FTA with China is being upgraded. Also, there are negotiations either ongoing or completed with the European Union and certain ASEAN countries. Negotiations are ongoing with Indonesia, for example, and then recently concluded with Singapore and Vietnam, if I'm not mistaken. And also negotiations for the Canada-ASEAN free trade agreements are expected to be concluded next year. So deeper economic integration is truly important because the balance of economic power globally is changing. And this is what I have here on this chart. It shows the size of certain economies in purchasing power terms as a share of global GDP. So not basically the size of their economies in terms of the volume, how much things they produce, not in terms of how much the stuff is worth, because price levels are quite different. So you can see that the green line, the US share, has been gradually declining. So its economic might is diminishing. And on the other hand, developing countries are increasing their importance in the global economy. The pink or the salmon colored line there is the ASEAN. It is on a slight increasing trajectory as well. But what is really important to note here is the significant increase of the RCEP, so the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is the gray line at the topmost line. And the RCEP is the 15-country agreement that the ASEAN is a big part of. So when you look at from this viewpoint, at the opportunities that the ASEAN has, they are certainly rather favorable. The second favorable factor that I'd like to highlight is the favorable demographics that the ASEAN has. Okay, first here in this chart, you can see that half of the world's population lives in that circle. So the ASEAN region is located where most of the action is. So truly, in that sense, it is at the center of the world population. And even more importantly, the ASEAN, like I was already referred to by an ambassador, the ASEAN has a young population. So a third, or exactly, the exact figure is 34% of the ASEAN's population is between 15 to 30 years old, which means that there is a huge pool of potential workers. As a comparison, in China, that share is 28%. In the US, it's 20%, and in the European Union, it's 18%. So having 34% of a young population, and they are truly digital natives. So that certainly creates many opportunities for businesses. And then the third factor is the economic growth outlook. So emerging Asia as a whole contributes about 60% of the world's economic growth, and the ASEAN region plays a big role here. Through the rest of the decade, the ASEAN's real GDP growth is forecasted to average 4.5% annually. And it is here in this chart with the pink column. And you can see that it is much higher than the world average economic growth, which is 2.7% for the rest of the decade. And even more, it's also higher than the average growth for all emerging and developing economies, which typically are very fast-growing economies, and that average is 4.1. So the ASEAN truly has something different in their economic policy mix or economy that makes them stand out. And I would argue that one of the key reasons is that the drivers of economic growth are quite balanced. So when you look at where the growth is coming from, it comes from consumption, both public and private. It comes from investments. Investment environment is quite favorable. Fixed asset investments are growing firmly, and also next exports are contributing to growth. So it's quite a balanced story. And often when you look at developing economies, they could be relying on one growth driver, whether it's like mining because of some natural resources and all that, but that the benefits don't get distributed broadly. So in this sense, the ASEAN is quite in a good position. Of course, there are very different economies in the region and significant country differences in country characteristics. When you have a 10-nation bloc, we have a super highly advanced economy like Singapore, and then we have less developed economies like Myanmar, for example. So there are certainly challenges when you think about the economy as a whole, but I would argue that because there are differences within the bloc, companies can find their optimal country within the bloc. But at the same time, the region can come together as a unified bloc is a great potential for businesses. So I will leave it there, and I'm looking forward to our panel discussion later on.
Thank you so much, Tuuli. So we have now panel discussion with Juha Markkanen, ambassador Finland to Singapore, and Tuuli, of course. Then Mikko Salmilahti, I don't know if we probably introduced him. He's managing director of ASEAN HR. I think you've been about 10, 15 years in Shanghai and so forth. But maybe Mikko, you can say a couple of words about you first, and then we start the panel discussion.
Thank you, Pasi. Yes, my name is Mikko Salmilahti. Only 11 years in Shanghai, but anyway, quite a substantial period in my lifetime, at least. I'm a private entrepreneur, one of the few Finnish ones here on this big market. And I'm also a very active FinCham member, board member, and have been also the chairman for 4 years in the past. So I hope to have today a kind of some views from the company perspectives on general macro level maybe, and also from maybe my own company perspective as a smaller business representative. I'm happy that I got invited and that there is also a voice of China present in this China +1 discussion.
But I understand even you are trying to expand to Singapore, so you kind of in this strategy mode already, right?
Yeah, it's a kind of thing that I have been like, if it come down to my business decisions, I've been thinking about China +1 for quite some time already. Hard to choose. As Tuuli mentioned before, these economies are highly diverse. I'm truly attracted by the maturity and safeness and high level of decision makers in Singapore, but I'm a little bit scared of the price levels there. Whereas, for example, Vietnam again, I could start a business with quite low cost, but it would take some time to come into good speed with that one. So truly interesting times. By the way, China happens to be in limelight in Finland. For those who don't know, we have our president visiting on an official state visit here still at the moment. And tomorrow, actually, he will be here in Shanghai. I will be invited also to dinner with him and the delegation. So there is 30 big stock-listed companies in the delegation, all probably also getting a kind of updated on China. And I would dare to claim that they have to, at this moment, also kind of think about these kind of strategies, what to do with China, what to do with ASEAN countries.
Yeah, at what point?
Okay, I see the panel already started.
Yeah. Thank you, Mikko. And important that you raised the state visit because China isn't going anywhere. But my point was that possibly during the coming decades, China is in a situation where they need to pump every year, several times, a lot of money, like Japan has made this great experiment of the finance and monetary policy. But concerning state visits, Singapore is very famously called small red dot here, but Sweden is going to make a state visit end of November to this small red dot, and from Sweden, led by King of Sweden, there will be 106 business delegation members, 106, led by Wallenberg family. So this is not, it's not a coincidence. They have a plan to look more, even more, although they have more strong basis here comparing Finnish companies, or at this very small red dot, as one example of these Southeast Asian countries. Amazing number.
Yeah, actually, this is a good, very segue. We've been talking about it, Juha, many times, and people here in Singapore. And when I saw Tuuli's presentation, I did make some preliminary questions for the panelists, as you always do. But I was actually writing a new question when I saw the Tuuli's presentation, and kind of comes back to your point and your point, Mikko, is that, so the question is, why these companies have not found Southeast Asia and seems to go to US instead right now? This might be my opinion, although ASEAN has been one of the winners of the chasing global trading system. So why has the Finnish companies or the Finnish government have not found Southeast Asia? What is the reason? What do you guys think?
If you allow, I will again start as a generalist coming from the foreign ministry. And I think, very honestly here, I don't know if there are at audience colleagues from foreign ministry, but possibly we diplomats need to look into the mirror, and we should have been made better strategies. And that is perhaps, we perhaps have, I mean, sometimes the Finnish mentality can be that we are only one issue, is we can take only one issue at a time. So, and earlier it was China. I think few years in the past it has been USA, and nothing wrong with that. I strongly wish that companies look to USA more and more and more. But now it has been USA and only one thing we can cope with. So perhaps it's the mentality issue. But I will, and I think our ambassador colleagues, if there are in the audience, some of my ambassador colleagues also, so from Southeast Asia here, yeah, so I will try to do our very best to raise the flag and make it, I mean, clear to Helsinki, to the foreign ministry and the prime minister and all the companies, EK, that this is a region which is really expanding and
only region.
Well,
could I say that?
Well, it very strong, like Tuuli said, I mean, hugely strong economic growth, and I mean this bigger area. I mean 50% of the population. So
what do you think, Tuuli?
Yeah.
What is the reason that these companies have not found Southeast Asia? Or some of them, of course, but not as big as, let's say, Norwegian, Swedish companies.
Yes.
Yeah, I tend to agree that there needs to be a bit more of education about the region itself. It's probably, when you think of like, okay, the ASEAN is probably quite an exotic destination for many Finnish companies, while the US as a major advanced economy, it's easy to get your head around it somehow. But I think there are still quite a lot other factors at play. A company would typically go to the US to have that market access to that massive market, and the US economy has been growing quite nicely lately. While to the ASEAN, you would probably come for different reasons, for supply chain management reasons and all that. So it's hard to say what the real reasons are, but I think we are getting there. Especially this webinar is a good example how we gradually can educate people and companies that there are options out there.
just a trivial fact that I heard last week from the chairman of the EU chamber here. It's not only, or we easily tend to think that it's Western companies trying to find strategies, sourcing or supply chain strategies outside China at the moment. But in fact, it's also Chinese companies in a very large extent. So the news I heard, unverified though, that Chinese Chamber of Commerce in Hanoi, covering Vietnam. So Chinese Chamber of Commerce had 1,000 members pre-COVID. And at the end of last year, it was 4,000. 4,000 Chinese companies during those hard years came to Vietnam. Of course, there's many reasons, but probably one of the biggest ones is to avoid possible or already that time existing tariffs and maybe even now growing tariffs to American market.
Would it be possible that, okay, of course, these companies they're smart in a way and really risk averse, but are they too afraid of the competition now? Though Japanese, Korean, and Chinese are here in full force. So, of course, yeah, Swedes are there, and Norwegians are there.
If I add, I mean, Tuuli, you made a very good point. Perhaps there is a perception gap in Finland at companies. They do not know we need to do more. I mean, we need to inform more of these countries, and we need to remember at the same time that Finnish companies haven't been doing export for hundreds of years, like Danish, Swedes, Dutch companies, or British, etc., German, US. So it's more or less. I mean, 30 years ago, beginning of 1990s, more and more SMEs started to do export. Before that, it was, I mean, Finnair was at foreign markets, Finnish paper factories and companies were at foreign markets, and a couple of few, but not. I don't think even in Singapore, like 100 now we have. So the development, we are so much kind of learning curve, perhaps. I don't know.
You're very diplomatic.
I don't know.
I think Mikko and maybe Tuuli, you have more knowledge of this, but do you have any success stories of, let's say, these companies of China Plus strategies that they diversified their operations or moved completely to any of the ASEAN countries? Any examples you can give us?
There are quite a few examples. If you look at the bigger global, these big multinational companies. So Siemens, for example, a good example. They've expanded their manufacturing operations to India and Vietnam. So not anymore only, well, it wasn't always only China, but just to diversify. Adidas, another one, Vietnam and Indonesia have become important hubs for them. And H&M, a clothing line, has also expanded operations to Vietnam again. So Vietnam seems to be coming up often. Bangladesh is another country where they've decided to move some of their manufacturing. So there's quite a few of them, but I'm still waiting for that Finnish star that shows how things are done. Mikko, maybe you have better insights on the Finnish landscape?
Yeah, Finland let's put it this way. Usually Finnish companies are not the first movers, unfortunately. So we kind of very often watch and see what is happening. I see more movement on the Swedish and Danish side, maybe to these markets. I know of Finnish companies that, for example, Lindström is opening a new service business in Vietnam. I think Marimekko is opening several, like Thailand. They are doing well in Singapore probably as well. So we have a couple of Finnish examples getting a bit more active there. But somehow I would like to point out that this is not like a zero-sum game always. Like usually what is good for China is usually good for ASEAN countries of the like geographical proximity. Very often if I talk with companies or if I look at the studies why sourcing or supply chain is considering Vietnam or Indonesia, is one of the reasons is proximity to China. That there's still like this kind of interdependency all the time. And China is, as Tuuli showed the graphs, China is more and more dependent on exports to ASEAN countries, not so much anymore to USA.
So you can basically, that would mean, well, actually, I think I already seen it, that when Chinese companies are moving to the manufacturing, maybe like the operations to, let's say, Vietnam, Indonesia, BYD, I think is opening a factory in Indonesia next year or this year. So I think that's going to be support. Then, of course, the subcontractors, the OEM companies are then following them probably there. That's probably one of the things that you just mentioned. So that's happening as well. We have a couple of questions from the audience. Antti, can you read any of the questions from the chat?
There's two questions from Marko Kotonen and Nikki from Arctic Security. So I start with Nikki's first question because it's a general one. What would be the top 3 industries that would benefit from this strategy in this decade? Top 3 industries.
Who wants first?
Well, technology is definitely one, especially because it's at the core of the U.S.-China trade conflict, and it seems that the U.S. is very decided on making sure that China will have difficulties in becoming a true technology global powerhouse. So moving technology companies will likely be moving or benefiting from a strategy like this big time.
I could take like from the other end, like it's high tech probably because of world politics, but then what the examples we see is a lot of furniture makers and apparel makers, all kind, like China used to be a big factory of apparel, like clothing. But nowadays it's mostly only what is left is highly technical, like winter or motorcycle clothing. These kind of companies still left here because of the much lower cost in ASEAN countries and skilled labor in that industry. So clothing, furniture, simple manufacturing. I think that one of the biggest investments from Nordic countries in Vietnam was by Lego. So Lego opened a big factory, reasonably simple products as well.
And I will add that although China will continue in the energy and green energy field, I mean solar panels, I mean most of those will be, I think in the future also will be done in China or wind powers, etc. But because there is so much economic growth and growth of population here in Southeast Asian countries, so the need for electricity is growing very rapidly. Actually, the most rapidly, I think, in the whole world. What I learned last week at the big International Energy Week here in Singapore, and that really the various types of power plants, etc., and greenfield investments, they need to be done, has to be done to these Southeast Asian countries. Yeah.
So green energy, probably smart cities, of course.
Exactly.
And of course, we see the Chinese, like BYD, sorry, I used the same example, in 10 years, suddenly they are the biggest car makers in the world. So they have to probably transfer their manufacturing somewhere else, the battery manufacturing as well, to somewhere else. And so on. There was another question online.
Yes, there is a comment and question from Marko Kotonen. It's related to electronics and machine building industries. So he was saying that the challenges outside of China were also related to talent levels. But for example, in Vietnam, this is getting better in some sectors. And anyhow, generally speaking, Chinese companies are still ahead of this many areas. And he has one question, which is that what would be the top? How is the cost level in Philippines compared to China? And this is related with the electronics and machine services.
Perhaps again, Tuuli, if you know.
So I don't have numbers on top of my head, but the Philippines is still very much in comparison to China. It's a cheap place to source your labor and all that. So, but unfortunately, right now I don't have any numbers to share. But going to that, the first comment there that Marco had, I totally agree that there are a lot of challenges. Of course, we can't be naive about that. So this labor or skilled labor shortages. But there are many others. Regulatory complexity is another challenge that firms have to pay attention to. There's a different quality of infrastructure in ASEAN countries. Of course, political and economic instability can be an issue in certain countries, and cultural differences. So we can't just close our eyes about the potential challenges too. It's better to be aware of them and do your research when you start implementing a strategy like this.
May I raise one issue? Okay, time is running. So this geopolitical issue, which actually Tuuli also very prominently you were talking about, but the world is now very turbulent, and in the Southeast Asian countries, among these or ASEAN 10 countries, member countries. So if we think of this Western kind of thinking and the alliances, so I think that it's good for companies also to know that Singapore is relying a lot and looking to West, although Singapore wants to have excellent relations to all areas and to all countries also here in Asia. But Philippines is now the Marcus Junior is there, and the change of the leader in Philippines has changed the policy making to my mind pretty much. So Singapore and Philippines and Taiwan, and then of course Japan, Korea, Australia. So these kind of countries are here thinking more and more in a similar way and seeing possible threats in a similar way. But very much is also depending on the future on the issue. Again, Tuuli was mentioning exactly. Next week and the big elections in the States. So it's going to be interesting. But generally, again, China isn't going anywhere, and these ASEAN countries want to have good relations to all countries neighboring here.
So, well, I think the great minds think alike. Actually, when I was writing a question before you started, maybe a bit off, but hedging. Is it possible for British companies to hedge their investment risks to Asia, or is it actually to US? Is it better from their point of view, to regardless who wins next week, is it better to go to US or ASEAN? Of course, short term, long term, nobody knows, right? Nobody. Totally.
Well, that's a tough question. I truly hope that we don't end up in a situation where countries and companies need to pick sides. I still hope that we can continue to live in this the world that there's dialogue and diplomacy that makes operating in, whether you're operating in ASEAN that is highly dependent on the Chinese economy, or if you are operating in the US, that you don't need to be so black and white of whose side you are picking. Of course, companies can hedge the geopolitical risks, preparation and research and that kind of stuff, and having the supply chain resiliency and agility are very important that you don't. And I think that's what a lot of companies learned during the pandemic, that you cannot, first of all, rely on one country as a source country, but you also have to have the ability to be agile with your supply chains, because rules and restrictions can change so quickly that you have to be able to adapt. And in that sense, having local partnerships is very important, because they can help you navigate through all this changing regulations. So yeah, there are ways to cope with this uncertain world for sure, but it's not always easy, that's for sure.
There's a comment from Kari regarding the energy production. China will be strong in wind energy as the production of new materials increasing based on the predictions. So 3 to 5 years later, the quality will rival the Torai from Japan. We take your word for it, so I don't mean anything. But last question from the audience about China Plus Many or China Plus 1, 2. Would China still maintain its manufacturing competitive advantage in the near future? Anybody? Rico?
I can try to answer. Yes, for the time being. I mean, everything is basically working fine here at the moment. Companies always say that the power of China is the manufacturing capabilities added with a super level of logistics and supply chain infrastructure. And it's not going away. It's not disappearing. It will stay, and that's what I'm trying to say. It's almost the end of our session, but no Finnish company has left China in the recent years, but no new investments. I don't remember that many new investments either. So it's a very status quo situation. Investments have been maybe low globally. The interest rates have been quite high, which is always taking down the kind of eagerness of money to find new places. But China is still very robust in manufacturing capabilities, and companies see that. Somehow I even feel that this year, after COVID, there was a kind of a period when everybody was really concentrating on finding alternatives, but that fever has dropped. People are somehow more relaxed now, and really company by company, because there is no solution that fits all. Should we do, all companies do this? What companies probably learned is to kind of do risk assessments, try to at least understand if the X are here, what is the worst case scenario in that case.
Any final words, Tuuli, from your part before we wrap up?
Well, I think China will certainly remain attractive in many areas, simply because, like Mikko said, the infrastructure is there, and there's no real other alternative that can produce at that scale. India is another country, but because of the structure of its economy, it will not be able to become the new China. It's not going to happen. So China will stay as a manufacturing powerhouse for sure. It's just that it's changing the strategies, climbing up in the value chain, and moving to produce higher value-added goods. And then that, of course, gives opportunities for the ASEAN region, the less developed countries, to pick those low-hanging fruit when it comes to textiles or simpler electronics and all that. So I think it can be a win-win for both the ASEAN and China.
My last remarks would be that if there are company representatives here in the audience, thanks for coming, and please use our services. Foreign Ministry is having roughly 90 missions globally. Please use our analysis. Please use Business Finland, because we are here in these foreign markets for you, and because the world is very turbulent at the moment, we can give you very important advice. So please use us, and of course, business councils and Finnish chambers. Please use the expertise of us. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have a closing remarks from our sponsor.
Okay, thanks, Pasi and Pekka Laitinen, Regional Head for Business Finland in Southeast Asia. Thanks for the excellent panel and interesting opinions. There was talk about lack of education and perception gaps. Those of you who want to know how the reality is here, Southeast Asia Trade Association in Helsinki is going to organize next week on Wednesday a hybrid event. You can join also as a webinar or go to the Central Center of Commerce offices in Helsinki on Wednesday morning. And the two Finnish factory managers from Malaysia are telling how they are running successfully a factory operation here. And what is important, Peikko and Sandvik, they both opened their factories last year. So it's very recent story. You can ask from them, why did they choose ASEAN and Malaysia, and how is it to do that kind of manufacturing business in the heart of Southeast Asia. So anybody interested, please join next Wednesday morning, Malaysia success stories from the Southeast Asia. Thank you.
We'll do. All right. Thank you so much, Pekka. All right. With that, I'd like to thank the panelists, Tuuli Makali, Mikko Samila, of course, and then Ambassador Juha Markkanen, and Antti Rahikainen, of course, from Vision Finland, our partner, organizing this event. We tried to get a recording of this and send it to all the participants. We have now 40 people, I think we're online, about 10 people here physically. So thank you so much. Thank you.
I will make a summary of the discussion for those who couldn't join today's webinar. So please follow Vision Finland's website and social media. And thank you all from Vision Finland.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.